In May 1945, American infantry units secured an Austrian concentration camp. They inspected the perimeter. On the security barrier, soldiers found a dead body bearing a crude swastika on its back, whose corpse hung on the wire meant for inmates. The visual assessment yielded an immediate anomaly. The deceased man served as the camp commandant. An American soldier stared at the perimeter mesh, a naked human form pressed against the steel. Bright red pigment formed the phrase Heil Hitler across the pale, dead skin. Lifeless legs dangled over the metal strands. Standard camp fences maintained a continuous current of 380 volts. This specific electrical output caused instant cardiac arrest upon human contact. His name was Franz Ziereis. He directed this extermination complex for 6 brutal years. The surviving inmates captured the former administrator, dragged him to the boundary line, and utilized his own execution infrastructure against him. The architect of the death machine died by his own operational tools. The physical destruction of Ziereis marked the functional collapse of the local camp network. But the institutional foundations of this violence trace back to an earlier geographical shift. The actual timeline of the state terror begins on March 12, 1938. 7 years prior to the commandant's death on the electrified wire, the German state expanded its borders. On March 12, 1938, Wehrmacht divisions crossed into Austrian territory. Military intelligence anticipated armed resistance. Instead, the advancing troops encountered civilian ovations. Thousands of citizens lined the transport routes. They threw flowers at the military vehicles. Public approval catalyzed institutional violence. Vienna immediately functioned as a testing ground for state terror. Civilians executed the initial phases. Austrian residents dragged Jewish citizens from their homes, not at night, in broad daylight. Crowds forced them to kneel. They made them scrub the city cobblestones. Perpetrators handed their victims small brushes. Often, they distributed standard toothbrushes. Bystanders laughed. They took photographs. This practice of cleaning streets with toothbrushes constituted the first mass public humiliation of Jewish citizens. The state apparatus legitimized this behavior prior to the establishment of the formal death camp system. The government soon required an isolated infrastructure. On August 8, 1938, the public phase transitioned into systemic confinement. SS units unloaded the first prisoner transport. Guards handed the inmates shovels. The column marched into the designated granite quarry. By August 8, 1938, public street terror required a systemic solution. The SS administration authorized a permanent site near Linz. The initial workforce arrived directly from Dachau. Inmates constructed the containment perimeter themselves. The dull gray granite of the mountain quarry blended with the fabric of their camp uniforms. Who supervised the deadliest camp system outside of Poland? A former butcher's apprentice from Munich. The infrastructure expanded. In 1939, the command established a second camp nearby. They called it Gusen. Together, these locations formed the Mauthausen operational zone. Transports delivered Soviet, Spanish, and Polish citizens. Over 14,000 Jewish prisoners entered the facility. The total registered intake reached 197,000 people, processing captives from every nation under military occupation. The SS bureaucracy placed Franz Ziereis in absolute control. He failed his civilian training. The state rewarded his violence. 95,000 inmates died within the walls of the complex. The primary extermination tool for the former butcher's apprentice was 186 stone steps. The SS engineers carved them deep into the base of the granite quarry. The carried stone weighed 50 kilograms. The starving prisoner weighed 40. How do you force such emaciated people to kill each other? The guards at the parachutist's wall offered a strict choice: a point-blank bullet, or a violent push of a comrade into the abyss. The execution mechanics relied on basic physiological depletion. The inmates climbed the staircase in a tight single file. Lifting that heavy mass up the incline demanded a caloric output that exceeded the daily camp ration 5 times over. A weakened man hoisted the rock. He took a forced step on the uneven stone surface. His muscle tissue failed. He lost his balance. He fell backward onto the prisoner directly behind him. The second man collapsed, then the third. Gravity initiated an unstoppable mechanical chain reaction. The dull thud of dropping granite blocks merged with the sharp crunch of fracturing human bones. The survivors reached the summit. They stood before a steep cliff edge. The camp administration designated it the parachutist wall. The guards aligned the exhausted men. The protocol demanded a rapid decision: push the man ahead or take a bullet. Many prisoners rejected the forced murder of their peers. They stepped toward the edge and jumped into the quarry themselves. The fatal leaps at the quarry required a systemic manager. Commandant Franz Ziereis supervised this extermination not from a distant Berlin office, but from his own wooden veranda. How did one functionary oversee a death factory of 95,000 victims? He did not rely on central ministries. He ran the operation directly from his family home. Ziereis settled his wife and children inside the restricted camp perimeter, establishing a perfectly ordinary domestic routine among the watchtowers. They shared quiet morning breakfasts. This idyllic family life stood in absolute contrast to the industrial slaughter outside. Just a few steps from their front door, the administration systematically produced 95,000 corpses. 95,000 dead. This metric represents the complete demographic eradication of a modern European municipality. The SS effectively wiped out the entire population of Flensburg. The camp leadership transformed mass extermination into household recreation. Ziereis stood on the terrace of his official residence. His 11-year-old son walked out to join him. The boy picked up a hunting rifle. He raised the weapon. He pressed the heavy wooden stock against his shoulder. He took careful aim at the inmates working below. The sharp echo of a hunting rifle cracked across the residential perimeter. The child pulled the trigger on a living target. Just hundreds of meters from that family patio, the state operated a different kind of machinery. Here, doctors like Erich Priebke turned execution into a regulated scientific protocol. 3,000 human beings. The SS stripped them naked and drenched them in ice water. The temperature stood at -10 degrees Celsius. They froze to death, not as victims of random cruelty, but as catalog data points in an extreme exposure study. The camp perimeter itself functioned as a calibrated testing instrument. The fences carried 380 volts. This was the exact industrial power capacity required to run heavy factory lathes. SS engineers simply adapted the electrical grid for human flesh. Guards threw living prisoners against the wire. The administration meticulously logged the resulting fatalities as attempted escapes. Inside the medical block, the methodology shifted from industrial physics to surgical trauma. The corridors carried the sharp chemical stench of phenol. Eduard Krebsbach bypassed traditional execution methods entirely. He drove his syringe directly into the beating hearts of his patients. Down the hall, camp physician Hermann Richter conducted anatomical endurance tests. He surgically extracted stomachs, livers, and kidneys. The subjects were kept entirely conscious. The objective was purely clinical. The state apparatus needed to document the exact timeline of biological collapse after severe organ loss. These men acted as system engineers, mapping the limits of human survivability. Dr. Erich Priebke perfected this standard. An 18-year-old prisoner arrived with a minor foot infection. The diagnosis served as a pretext for dissection. Priebke strapped the young man to the operating table. He made the deep abdominal incisions without administering anesthesia. The required narcotics sat fully stocked in the nearby glass cabinets. Priebke deliberately withheld them to observe the shock. He sliced the conscious patient open. He extracted a kidney. He performed a castration. Finally, he severed the head. The camp laboratory provided the boiling equipment to strip the flesh off the bone. Dr. Priebke kept the polished human skull on his office desk. While doctors documented death on the operating tables, the camp administration turned food into a weapon of mass destruction. What is the physical price of such a nutritional economy? Between 1940 and 1942, the average prisoner's weight collapsed to 40 kilograms. By 1945, the authorities cut daily rations to a strict limit. Inmates received between 600 and 1,000 calories. 600 calories is exactly half the daily nutritional requirement of a 3-year-old child. The SS issued this precise volume to adult men performing heavy industrial labor. The caloric deficit functioned as a calculated demographic control mechanism. The administration systematically dismantled the human body from the inside. Prolonged starvation altered basic physiology. Cognitive barriers disappeared. During the winter months, the extreme biological drive overrode all internal restrictions, leading to documented survivor accounts of cannibalism. A clandestine market for human tissue emerged within the unheated barracks. Desperate prisoners targeted the weakest individuals. Severely ill inmates stayed awake. They were afraid to sleep. Total SS control failed in one specific room, the camp photo laboratory. How do you prove crimes of this scale? Francisco Boy, a veteran of the Spanish Civil War, found the answer. He smuggled 2,000 negatives out of a darkroom. The workspace reeked of the acrid chemical smell of developer. Boy processed the film. Then he extracted the evidence. Films capturing high-ranking Nazi officials touring the quarry vanished. Boy carried the strips out right under the guards' noses. The pedantic bureaucracy of the SS engineered its own downfall. Officers cataloged their daily inspections to maintain strict internal order. But this exact documentation provided undeniable proof of systemic extermination. Prosecutors later weaponized these photographs at the Nuremberg trials. A single prisoner dismantled the chain of command. 2,000 negatives awaited the Allied forces. On May 23, 1945, former Polish inmates recognized the architect of the Mauthausen system near a hunting lodge in Spital an der Drau. Franz Ziereis wore civilian clothes. He attempted to run. United States soldiers fired twice. One bullet shattered his left arm. The second pierced his back, traveling directly through his lung and stomach before exiting his torso. Within days, his stripped corpse would hang from the camp perimeter wire. But first, he faced military investigators. Soldiers carried the bleeding commandant into an American field hospital. The United States Army had set up this medical facility inside the exact Gusen barracks where Ziereis previously authorized mass executions. He survived for 6 hours. His physical collapse was irreversible. Yet during this window, he dismantled the SS chain of command. Ziereis detailed the gassings. He cataloged the freezing executions. He officially confirmed that extermination directives arrived directly from Heinrich Himmler and Ernst Kaltenbrunner. The commandant admitted to deliberately cutting prisoner food supplies. He testified that a regional official redirected 50% of camp rations to the Austrian civilian population. Systemic starvation was a documented administrative policy. On May 24, 1945, Franz Ziereis died. He was 39 years old. Former inmates immediately extracted his body from the morgue. They stripped him naked. They painted swastikas on his skin. The prisoners hung the commandant over the concrete posts at Gusen. His legs straddled the same lethal wire he had utilized for executions. The cadaverous smell of decomposing flesh eventually saturated the perimeter. An American officer officially ordered the removal of the remains due to the unbearable stench. To comprehend the absolute collapse of this extermination apparatus, the timeline must rewind to early 1945. The Eastern Front was rapidly disintegrating. Why did the SS drive tens of thousands of dying prisoners into an already overflowing camp? The advancing Allied armies forced the Reich to physically compress its entire Holocaust infrastructure. The regime desperately attempted to maintain control over its captive workforce. Evacuation trains left Auschwitz and Gross Rosen. The destination was Mauthausen. Austria became the centralized repository for the collapsing camp network. Logistics dictated the process. Transport locomotives arrived at the rural siding. Guards unsealed the wooden doors of the cattle cars. Inside, bodies lay stacked against the freezing walls. The living stood silently among the dead. No water, no rations. The camp population surged past all sustainable limits. The administration faced a severe logistical bottleneck. The system adapted. The mechanism of extermination shifted to liquidating the surplus population. On April 20th, SS officers walked through the overcrowded infirmary barracks. They pointed at the weakest individuals. Medical staff systematically selected 3,000 sick prisoners. Guards separated them from the main population and executed them. The camp registry recorded the mass murder as routine attrition. The extermination protocol remained rigid until the very end. On April 28th, guards escorted a final group to the subterranean level. 33 Austrian political prisoners stepped into the concrete room. The heavy steel doors of the gas chamber swung shut. The iron latches engaged with a loud, deafening clack. The administration deployed the lethal gas for the final time. The Third Reich had exactly 9 days left until total capitulation. Yet the extermination bureaucracy executed its final directives with flawless, mechanical precision. 7 days later, combat infantrymen of the United States Army walked up to the main gates of Gusen. On May 5, 1945, the SS state monopoly on violence officially collapsed. American troops entered the perimeters of Gusen and Mauthausen. Most garrison commanders had already abandoned their posts. The administration lost control. Authority transferred directly to the liberated. The unregulated shift of power manifested in immediate, unmitigated physical retribution against the internal camp administration. Inmates systematically hunted down the capos. These supervisors had enforced the daily terror in exchange for survival. The hierarchy dissolved. Retribution was absolute. A Russian prisoner raised a heavy wooden chair. He brought it down on a capo's skull. He struck the man until all movement ceased. Inmates forced another capo head-first into a fire barrel. A heavy splash of water echoed across the yard. They held him submerged until he drowned. A Polish prisoner drove a knife through a supervisor's chest. The kinetic force pinned the body directly to the wooden bunk. While United States Army soldiers observed the executions without intervention, the surviving SS guards faced the complete inversion of their totalitarian system. Inmates marched their former captors down into the granite quarry. Now they carried the stones. The capo corpses in the barracks and Ziereis' body on the fence marked the final entries in a bureaucratic ledger. The SS had maintained this registry since 1938. Between that year and 1945, 197,000 human beings entered the Mauthausen system. 95,000 perished. How does a state machine write off 95,000 lives? It simply reduces them to administrative statistics. Mathematically, this total equals the complete eradication of an average European city of that era. Every single inhabitant, erased. Franz Ziereis managed this industrial operation. The camp functioned as a systematic execution facility for 7 years. Inmates died through gas. They died from starvation. They froze in the quarries. Ziereis monitored this daily attrition rate from his private residence right outside the perimeter fence. The official archives recorded the ultimate cost: 95,000.